Hello everyone, welcome to my review of the new port of Deathsmiles 1 and 2 for the Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One. For those keeping track, this is actually the third time Deathsmiles has been released, the first time on the Xbox 360, the second time on Steam, and now this third time on modern consoles, and this is the second time Deathsmiles 2 has been released, where it had a previous version on the Xbox 360, but it never made its way to PC. So in today's video, we're not only going to be discussing these games in themselves as shmups, but we're going to be answering the big question when it comes to the technical performance of these newest ports, especially when it comes to input lag and slowdown accuracy. Because for those keeping track of the lore behind this port, both companies involved with it, City Connection, the publisher, and Zerodiv, the developer, have done some pretty awful shmup ports in the past, and I had to give them negative reviews to some notoriety. And so the question on everyone's mind today is, have they learned their lesson? Are they going to deliver another laggy, awful experience? Are we going to get another big, steaming pile of angry Nintendo Life fans? Or are they going to come through and deliver a quality product? But before we get into all that aspect of the review, let's begin a little bit by talking about Deathsmiles 1 and 2 for those who may not be familiar with them. So actually, Deathsmiles 1, if you've seen previous videos on this channel, is my favorite horizontal shmup of all time for many reasons. However, one of those reasons was not, emphasis on not, the original marketing angle of the 2008 port on the Xbox 360. So for those who remember back in those days, Cave took a pretty aggressive marketing strategy, I guess you could say, when it came to the depiction of the underage characters in their materials and some of the things they would say in their materials. And I think it really ended up leaving a sort of ugly smudge on the reputation of Deathsmiles. And I remember some early reviews and discussions around the game at that time, and that sort of element of the marketing taking front and center stage. I wasn't a big fan of it, to say the least. But I will say, when you're in the game itself, all the underage stuff doesn't really present itself as a thing outside of maybe a few transition screens between levels or whatever. But it's really in the marketing material that this was more emphasized. And so what I was concerned about with this newest port is, what are City Connection and Zerodiv going to do here? Are they going to take this angle and push it further? Or are they going to take a step back? And I'm happy to say I think they took a step back here. I like the way they marketed it this time around. I like the material, I like the artwork, at least everything that I'm seeing so far. So shout out to them for at least taking that approach when it came to the port. That aside though, let's talk about Deathsmiles as a shmup. So graphically, Deathsmiles is easily one of my favorite shmups of all time, because I love the idea of taking these cutesy cotton-like mechanics and then mixing in these gothic horror elements, basically making Tim Burton's version of a shmup. It reminds me a little bit of The Nightmare Before Christmas. The soundtrack and sound effects really emphasize this, and all the wacky, zany characters, the tree, the cow. It's basically like the Halloween shmup. And it's sort of obligatory every year you stream Deathsmiles on Halloween. And then with the gameplay itself, what I really like about this game as a horizontal shmup is the idea to add in the ability to turn around and address the screen on both sides, have enemies attack you from both sides, and you're moving around the screen in a whole different way than you would than if it was just a traditional horizontal shmup. And I do know that Deathsmiles was not the first shmup to do this. There were other shmups before that had you turn both directions. But I do kind of wonder why this didn't become more of a standard, because it just seems like such a natural way to present shmups in the horizontal space. Because unlike vertical, it is actually very easy and natural to read bullet patterns from the left and the right. That isn't really that big of a deal. Our eyes are able to process that pretty easily. Unlike when you play vertical shmup, sometimes when you have bullets coming in from the bottom of the screen, like you get in Ketsuri from time to time, that can be absolutely brutal. And so I do wish more shmups would take this approach, and I have seen them do it, but this is one of the standout reasons why I like Deathsmiles so much. And then just the bullet patterns themselves are really fun and well done. And so I won't get too deep into the gameplay, because I actually have a whole commentary review if you want to get real nitty gritty there. But I will also say that I really like the rank system that Deathsmiles introduces. So basically what happens is that you have a sort of Super Mario Bros. 3 style stage select where you can go through and select the stages on a map. And then you get level 1, level 2, level 3, the ranks. And I think for a lot of people, Deathsmiles level 1 ends up being one of their very first bullet hell 1cc's because it is pretty calm and kind and really gentle towards the player. And then once you get that sort of under your feet, then you can go ahead and go up to level 2, which introduces a little bit more aggressive patterns and everything. Then you do up to level 3, and that's where you're going to start getting later on suicide bullets, more aggressive patterns. It gets to be a lot of fun. And so in the gameplay department, I've always been a massive fan of Deathsmiles 1 and the way it's worked. But I will say this doesn't quite hold true for Deathsmiles 2. And this is going to be my confession for the review, which is I've never really been a big fan of Deathsmiles 2. I don't like Deathsmiles 2 all that much. I sort of refuse to play it beyond just a little bit here and there. I did play it for the review, obviously, but overall, I do think of the 2 in the package, I sort of forget it's included because I just don't like it. But this is just my opinion, because I do know that some other really talented shmup players like Iconoclast and Plasmo, unless they are trolling, are big fans of Deathsmiles 2, and they do think the gameplay is a lot of fun. And I have seen other players say they do like Deathsmiles 2. So it is what it is, how you feel about it, if you like it or if you don't. The big turnoff for me, of course, is the graphical presentation of the game. I think it looks like hell. I think it is easily the ugliest cave game ever made, and I don't know why they took this direction other than just massive budget cuts or something. The graphical stylings of this game, I think, are even worse than Castle Shikigami. Sorry, Castle Shikigami fans, but this game makes that game and that series look amazing in comparison. So not a huge fan in the gameplay department for that. So I actually don't have a whole lot of insights on Deathsmiles 2 overall. I think it is what it is. You either like it or you don't. But I will say that of the 2, I think it's pretty safe to say that most players definitely prefer Deathsmiles 1, myself very firmly in that camp. And so with that being said, let's now discuss the content included on this port, which is pretty impressive, I will say. And so like I was wondering, this is pretty much a one-to-one copy of the Steam and Xbox 360 version, where you get the same ranges, you get the same modes, you get the same UI, you get the same wallpapers, you get the same graphics. You get basically everything is the same. I was hoping that they would improve the training mode a little bit, because when you go into the training mode, it has all the same features and options as the previous ports. But what the previous ports did not have that I was hoping would be included is a boss select. It was an odd oversight that Deathsmiles never got a boss select in the training mode, and unfortunately it continues to be absent. So if you want to practice the final boss, you're going to have to tough it out and play through the entire final stage every single time, which I will admit, when I did this, was an absolute pain in the ass. But if you want to practice that final boss, you either need to just get really good at the game and just get through the credits all the time, or you need to just stage select the final stage and do it over and over again. Or you can be cool and use MAME and use some save states in MAME, which isn't all that accurate slowdown wise, but at least you get the idea. But yeah, that was a big missed opportunity, at least something I was hoping they would fix that they didn't. But it is pretty much what you see is what you get, as far as if you own the Steam version, it's the same as the Steam version. If you own the Xbox 360 version, it's the same as the Xbox 360 version, not counting the DLC, which we'll talk about in a minute here. One other criticism that I have is that there's this weird bug with the PlayStation 4 port with the screen resize. So when you go in to resize the screen, with the previous ports you can zoom in so that it fills your screen, not like stretched out fills, but fills your screen within the aspect ratio. But for some weird reason, the PS4 port doesn't allow it. It only allows you to go up 2%, and it's like, nah, that's it. And I heard that City Connection wrote on Twitter that they're going to fix this or are thinking about patching it. Don't think about patching it, patch it, because this is sort of a pain in the butt. I prefer to play with a max size screen, so I think this again is another sort of like technical thing that they should be patching, that I thought it'd be worth taking note of, and hopefully they do patch it here soon so you can play it in full size. And apparently this is just on the PlayStation 4 version and not the Nintendo Switch version. And so that's Deathsmiles 1. Then you have Deathsmiles 2. Again, you have all the same stuff that you have in the Xbox 360 version. Now, I'm less of an expert on the Deathsmiles 2 Xbox 360 port. I have it, I've played it a time or two, and so if I'm missing something about that port, forgive me here, but it seems like everything that's in that port is also here. One little hint I will say is that when you're playing the game, you'll notice that at the end of the stage, you have to watch these stupid cutscene movie things. If you go into the options menu, you can actually disable that. It has movies and you can disable movies. I recommend you do that for your own sanity. If you're not having to sit through those movies every time you play. But again, it seems like with Deathsmiles 1, this is just a moving forward of the content from the Xbox 360 version. And so that brings us to the final and crucial part of this review, which is the technical performance. How does this game actually play? Because that's really the question at hand here. And so let's begin by talking about Deathsmiles 1. And so Deathsmiles 1 has a pretty interesting porting history where a lot of people tend to agree that the best version of the game, outside of the arcade obviously, is the Xbox 360 port, because when it made its way to Steam, there were some issues with the slowdown accuracy, where it was missing a bunch of slowdown, especially in some of the higher difficulty modes and some of the more hectic end stages. That got to be a pretty big problem. I remember, I think Jamers did a video comparing the slowdown accuracy between the two, and the Steam version is just moving way faster than the Xbox 360 version. And so I tend to still play the Xbox 360 version, though I will say that the Steam version does have a slight edge on input lag. So when you test the input lag, the Xbox 360 version is pretty solidly just 3 frames. And then when you test the input lag on the Steam version, it comes out to be about 2.5 frames. And I say it's about 2.5 because some of the tests it comes out 2, then some of the tests it comes out 3, and you can tell just looking at the footage. If I had a higher frame rate camera, I could get more accurate. But you can tell just looking at the footage that it's just in between the two. It's just really sort of depending where you get. It's either 2 or 3 frames, sort of in that area. And so then the question is, what is going on with this port? Because as we've seen in previous City Connection and Zerodiv releases, they have not exactly been efficient when it comes to input lag. And I have a whole bunch of material around the subject of input lag. If you want a really in-depth discussion about why input lag matters, at least in my opinion, there's a whole podcast episode about it with me and Shmup Junkie called The Great Input Lag Debate. So if you want just all the content you want to hear about input lag and shmup, there it is. But I will say when it comes to the numbers on this port, I have good but not great news. It's good, but it's not great, basically. Because when you test the input lag on the Deathsmiles 1 port on PlayStation 4, it comes out to be 4 frames. And that's on a CRT with the fastest arcade stick available, just like on the previous games. So that is an extra frame over the Xbox 360 port, and that is about 1.5 extra frames over the Steam version. And that isn't all that surprising, to be honest, but it's definitely way better than what it could have been. We could have easily been looking at a massive input lag problem of like 6 or 7 frames. So that is pretty solid. But the problem is that this is the part that's a little bit tricky when it comes to this port, is that when you compare it to the Steam version and you compare it to the 360 version, it is a step down. And so if you already have the Steam version and you already have the Xbox 360 version and you're perfectly happy playing it on those, when it comes to the input lag, you're still getting a better experience on those than on this newest port. That's just the objective numbers. You do with them what you will. It could have been a lot worse, I will admit. And I didn't get around to buying the Nintendo Switch version because I've already spent enough money on this damn game. We'll talk about that with the DLC. But I would guess that it is very likely that the Nintendo Switch version is 5 frames, because the way it works, at least across all the stuff that I've measured, is that the PlayStation version has 1 less frame of lag as the Nintendo Switch version. And I have a whole video about why this is, called the input lag paradox. So if you want to know why the Switch version tends to have this extra frame of lag that you cannot get rid of no matter what you do, you can check that video out. But yes, so 4 frames for the PlayStation version, probably 5 frames for the Nintendo Switch version. Not the worst thing in the world, but I did have a question that I've always had when it comes to the Deathsmiles releases, which is, you'll notice that there's different versions of the game. There's arcade mode and original mode. Arcade mode is using the PCB style graphics, and then original mode is using the graphics that they introduced on the Xbox 360 version. And I always wondered if there was an input lag difference between these modes, and sometimes when I play it almost seems like there is, but the input lag reader does not lie. There is no difference between the modes when it comes to input lag. It's just 4 across the board. Same thing with Mega Black Label, just 4. So now let's talk about the Deathsmiles II input lag. How does that stack up? 4 frames. So at least it's consistent. So 4 frames, and likely on the Nintendo Switch, 5 frames. So now let's talk about slowdown accuracy, and this is where the review gets interesting, because slowdown accuracy is very hard to pin down. It's very hard to figure out, and so when I was playing it, it felt pretty similar to the other versions of the game when it came to slowdown accuracy. Now again, it's really hard to say because I've never played the original arcade PCB, and I don't know how the original arcade PCB slowdown acts, but it does seem to be fairly within the range of what you'll get on either the Steam port or the Xbox 360 port. Nothing major stood out as a problem, and then I have read some reports that actually the slowdown accuracy is pretty solid on this newest release, and that they did do a pretty good job of getting the slowdown accuracy correct. So maybe that's a little bit of a trade-off. You might get a little bit better slowdown accuracy with the cost of more input lag. Do with that information what you will. Now when it comes to Deathsmiles 2, I have no freaking clue what the slowdown accuracy is, so I'm just going to refer to the internet here. And EOJ on his site, Cave STG, he has the original PCB. He tested it, and he felt like the Deathsmiles 2 slowdown on this version is really awful and not accurate at all. So a big fail there with Deathsmiles 2, and I would be more bummed, but I don't really like Deathsmiles 2. So again, it is what it is. Do with that information what you will. And so now let's discuss the final element of this review, the DLC, because in my opinion so far I haven't really seen a whole lot of reasons to pick up this port in comparison to the previous ports. So again, just a quick recap: same content, a little bit more input lag, maybe slightly improved slowdown, though it is kind of hard to say. Now we get to the DLC, which I was considering probably the main reason to pick up this port, because this is something that you're not going to be able to get on the previous versions of the game. And this is actually Zerodiv putting in some effort and making something new for the fans. And I ended up buying it, and I will say it was $25. And in my opinion, at least looking back on it now, I think that was a little overpriced. 25 bucks is a lot in the world of shmupping. That's like a brand new shmup in a lot of cases. And so 25 bucks, what you get 5 new characters, which is a pretty cool idea. And then you get 2 DLC soundtracks. The soundtracks are from the Gothic Maho mobile game, and you get an arranged one and an original one. They're pretty cool. They're not amazing in my opinion, but they are pretty cool. Now let's talk about these extra DLC characters. They seem to be pretty powerful. Now at first I didn't think they were all that great because I was playing them in comparison to Rosa, and they're not better than Rosa really. And so I was thinking, oh, okay, they're not all that great. And then Buffy pointed out to me that that's because Rosa is just really freaking good and the rest of the characters aren't nearly as good. So when you compare them to the other characters that aren't Rosa or aren't Sakura, I think they're pretty equivalent in terms of power, and they seem to be and they're pretty cool as far as their abilities and everything like that. One of them is absolutely ridiculous because her option holds still and then she flies around it, and it makes it pretty much impossible to use the option to block suicide bullets. Maybe it would be interesting at the very least to see people use this ship type to get some clears in rank 3 and how that would look. Maybe I'm missing something here. The other characters are pretty cool. I don't think visually they're all that intriguing, all that great. They seem a little bit generic to me visually looking. Some of their bullets look really cool. Overall, I don't know how I feel about these DLC characters. They didn't wow me. They didn't really make me go, oh hell yeah, you have to get these characters. But they weren't awful either. Like you need to totally avoid the DLC. again, this is the tough part with this port, is it isn't necessarily knocking it out of the park, but it isn't falling on its face and completely failing. And so again, I can't really give you a full assessment of how you might feel about the DLC. I personally sort of regret getting it, honestly. I prefer to have just kept my 25 bucks. But you might be very different and you might really get into these DLC characters. I think they did make an effort here. I just don't know if they're quite worth it or not. I just feel like it would have been great if they had a really cool standout character like a Rosa or like a Sakura, because that's, at least for me, that's sort of the problem, is they don't really stand out as much as the original characters, aren't as cool as the original characters. But they are a nice addition, definitely. But again, the $25 price tag makes it kind of a tough pill to swallow. So overall, good news for those who have pre-ordered this game. You don't have to throw it in the toilet. But for those hoping it would be the greatest Deathsmiles port of all time, I think it's a bit of a wash. And who knows, maybe it'll have improvements in the future. It'll have more cool DLC in the future. I do like that the game has made its way onto modern consoles, especially the Xbox One. The poor Xbox One never gets shmups. So with all that said, thank you for tuning in to the video. Please like, subscribe, share with all your friends. Check out the Reddit, check out the Patreon. The Patreon really helps keep the channel going and keeps these reviews going, especially since this damn game cost me $65 freaking dollars. Not exactly going to recoup those costs, I don't think, but hope you all found it useful. Thanks so much. So thank you to the $5 patrons: 100, Dingo, Another Joe, Anthony A, Aaron Iodice, Aaron Solis, Ben, Blur, STG, Borgie22, Brian Reboot, Brian Shiver, Chris Yuzufovich, Chronic Burnout 3, Corey Mark, Daniel Savage, Darren Griffin, Delta Tango 6, Disco Stas Leia, DJ 420 Praise It, Dubs, Entropy, Eric H, FCK Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Hausu, Ilya, Kiwi, JLab, JB, RPG, Joe Angelo, John Kelly, Gameboy Guru, K, K2, Kiko Man 589, Larridge, Malaise, Mark Toms, Maz, Megadeth, Minung, Mechalin, Mitch LY, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, Neon Dagger Games, Okla Kugels, Philip Mason, Portal 63, Rattlecat, Raul, Real Skeen, Riff Mason, Shane Sintiensky, SLW, The Boot Rex, The Real Ikuzo, The Dirty Screech, The Old Bensta, TRM, Sugumo, Twilight EX, Plasmo, and Utakaya. Thanks for watching.